Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be going over the history and geography of Anosy in Madagascar. Now, just a quick note that I have to say at the start of every video about Madagascar is that the English pronunciations of things in Madagascar and the Malagasy pronunciations of things in Madagascar are extremely different. I'm pretty sure this place is called Anosy. Pretty sure. But in English it's Anosy. So since I speak English, specifically American English, I'm pronouncing it the American English way. In the same way that we say Paris instead of Paris, right? It's like that. But those of you from Madagascar or who are Malagasy, leave me the kindest comments and say like, your pronunciation's great. And that makes me really happy. Thank you so much. I try my best. I try my hardest. So I appreciate that. But tonight we're going to talk about this area here, southern Madagascar, which is right next to Android that we just talked about a couple of weeks ago. So this is its neighbor. Not really much of a shared history until the last 100 years or so. It's very distinct from it. But first I want to talk about geography before I get ahead of myself, because as you can see, it has this wonderful Indian Ocean coastline. And then just to the south here, it has this kind of like the last vestiges of the beautiful tropical waters of the Indian Ocean down here. And all along here you can see the mountains here. Is this last chunk of the eastern rainforests of Madagascar. So I'm sure when you think of Madagascar, you probably think of the movie and how it's very jungly and wild. That region is along this area here, along the coast. So you get just the last vestiges of it. And you can see that there's a national park here and lots of reserved spaces. The government, since the, I want to say late 90s, early 2000s, has done a lot to try to preserve some of the wilderness of Madagascar, because for a long time the trees were chopped down for plantations and ranching also in this region. So in order to save these very important forests where lots of creatures live that can only be found here, we want to protect them. Lots of areas are protected, and there's quite a few in Anosy. We have this gorgeous coastline here with beautiful beaches, and this region down here gets quite a bit of tourism because you have the beach resorts, and then you can take trips up into the national park and see the wildlife and the beautiful landscape, which I'll show you on Google Earth after we go through the history. But the further north you go, the more inland we get, and the drier and drier it gets until we get this very almost desert parched region up here. And this area is where most of the cattle ranching is at. And it's very important in the societies here, because it's one of those cultures where the more cattle you have, the more important you are in your community. So they raise zebu, which is a kind of cow that you would find mostly over in Asia. But the culture here came from Asia. They're not an African culture, believe it or not, even though Madagascar is part of Africa, and Africa is just right over there. It's made up of Asian and East Asian cultures, but we'll talk about that in a second. So, rice farming and zebus are big in Madagascar, but in this region it's zebus. There's no rice grown here from what I can tell. Mostly the things that are grown here are succulents because it's very dry. Let's jump into it. Let's talk about that history. So the earliest inhabitants of this region would have arrived in the 11th century. That's CE. And like I said, the cultures came from Asia and East Asia, like Indian subcontinent and Malaysia, Indonesia, over there. We're not exactly sure. DNA can only tell us so much. It can't pinpoint exact regions, but the Malagasy people today are descended from people from East Asia. So it was uninhabited before they arrived. And the people that lived here along the coast actually traded with China. They were part of the very lucrative Indian Ocean trade. And they traded some of their rock that I assume was good for sculpting and things for China glassware and pottery. In the 16th century, a new culture arrived from the north known as the Zafiramenia. And they were very different from the people who'd been living here. They were Muslim, for one thing. They were literate, which was apparently like a huge shock, which I assume they thought it was magic, right? That they could read. And they brought a lot of the architecture that we see today in this area. Wooden houses, basically, like thatched roof, all those things. They were also lighter skinned than other people here. Malagasy people typically are this beautiful dark brown skin, so they were much lighter than the people who lived here. And they claim to be descended from a family from Mecca that traversed the deserts there and eventually came from India down to here, according to the ancient legends in their old kingdom, which lasted until the 1700s, 1800s, 1700s, like late 1700s. So they dominated the area up here. Down here, it was actually the Portuguese that started to move in. Unexpectedly, because the first Portuguese to arrive were shipwrecked. And more Portuguese would arrive via shipwreck in this region. And they founded little towns here. We can see Colonial here was the biggest one. And it became part of the trade when Portuguese ships would come to rescue the shipwrecked sailors. And we're like, this place isn't so bad. We could probably utilize this. So in the 1600s, the Portuguese started to move in more formally, and they established missions. And that went extremely poorly. Lots of mishaps and miscommunications that led to the Portuguese being driven out. Not to mention disease as well affected the Portuguese. So they established a town. They were there for about 20 years and then left and abandoned it. And no other European power would come here until the French in 1642. They actually made it a colony, this southern area here. They revived the town here and named it Fort Dauphin. And as part of the lucrative Indian Ocean trade of the 1600s until the year 1674, when disease and the local population drove them out and they abandoned the area. And this area was pretty overrun by pirates taking advantage of that lucrative Indian Ocean trade and all the abandoned European buildings to live in. That would have been like the late 1600s, early 1700s. And it was around this time that the Zafiramenia kingdom would corrode inside itself and collapse. But those people mixed with the native peoples here, creating the indigenous group known as the Anosy, which is the dominant ethnic group in this area today. Fort Dauphin would reopen in 1819 by the French and stay open. And this was permanent. Now, I need to turn my book over for my notes so I can check the years. So I don't want to tell you the wrong years because there's lots of years coming up. Do that carefully. Yes, the French were here to stay, except that the kingdom of Imerina invaded in 1825. So we've talked about them many times because it's by far the most important ethnic group in Madagascar's history. They came from the capital way up here in Antananarivo, just north of there, and they invaded like a good 98% of Madagascar and controlled most of the island. So the French had to contest with them. They were pushed out and jostled, and at one point completely excommunicated from the island when Queen Ranavaluna I outlawed Christianity and anything European. But her son would undo all of her policies. She was a very eccentric and bloodthirsty lady, let's just say, for monetization's sake. And the French would come right back gladly. And they would, of course, take huge advantage of Madagascar and invade the island in 1883 and make the whole island into their colony, subjugating the Merina Kingdom. They built a lot of missions here. This area is predominantly Christian, but there's still many Muslims. And they also made some discoveries in rubber. It turns out rubber trees naturally grow down here. I thought it was only in Brazil. So of course they hopped on that in the late 1800s, once cars were becoming a thing and you needed the rubber for those tires. The French took a lot of advantage of the people here and overtaxed them and seized a lot of their land for plantations. And there were many revolts. The biggest being after World War II, after the shenanigans of World War II, right? Because it was Vichy France and all of that. The first revolt started in the early 1900s. The biggest one began in 1947, where the entire island rose up against the French, and the French, for monetization and relaxation purposes, massacred the people. It was horrific. It was a bad, bad time. I can't stress enough. Think they, attacked protesters. Think burned villages, destroyed whole communities, things like that. They went through and slaughtered many, many people throughout this island. And I'm trying to say this as relaxingly as possible, but it was one of the regions that was hit hard by that, because the people have been uprising for many decades at this point. And they would continue to do so after Madagascar gained independence, because Madagascar had some weird political phases. They went through a whole socialist phase, which people here weren't happy about, and that was when most of the protests occurred in the 1970s and 1980s. And once that collapsed and it became more, I'm blanking on the word, market economy, I suppose. It's died down, but it still rises up now and again. And it's mostly for representation in the government, because they're not very well represented down here. Not to mention, this area, especially in the north, is stricken by many droughts and floods, a very vicious cycle of droughts and floods. There's quite a lot of poverty in this region up here. Not a lot of access to clean water and sanitation. Not a lot of schools, It's very poverty stricken the more farther north you go, the worse it gets. So it's something that, not just the government, but a lot of humanitarian groups are working on, but it's very slow progress because, change has to come from within the government here. It can't all come from outside do-gooders. And progress is slow but steady from what I can tell. It is happening, but, that drought and flood cycle doesn't help anybody. So that is the history of Anosy. Let's take a look at Google Earth because there are some cool pictures to show you in this area. Here we go. I'm going to show you as best I can. I'm really zoomed in. Let me zoom out on my tablet so that you can see exactly where we are in the world if you're not quite sure where Madagascar is located. Here is the African continent. There's big old Madagascar, Africa's largest island. So you can see how interesting it is that this culture isn't indigenously African, but came from cultures from over here. All the way over here. We don't know if they came like this, or like this, or crossed over the land, found it, but they certainly came. And here you can see from above this green belt here of beautiful, lush, thick rainforest that just trickles into the southern part here. You can see it better there. So let's start off by looking at the big city. Colonial. Which you can see that's how it's spelled in Malagasy. It's how it's spelled in English, or French, I suppose, Aéroport de Colonial. So this is the big bustling city. You can see lots of cool little lakes there as well. But we're going to look down here. This is the old French fort, Fort Flacourt, which I don't think that has a slideshow. But there's a little museum right here, Musée de Flacourt. Come on. Where we can see some of the old relics. There's the view, there's the old fort, and lots of old cannons protecting the area. Look how beautiful the mountains in the background. And the Indian Ocean coast. It's so pretty. Look at this old engraving from 1768 to 1770, it says. And yeah, lots of tourists come here to explore the old history. Look at that old cannon there, perched just as it was. And lots of cool photographs from this time as well. My neighbor's walking directly overhead. I apologize. But look at all these old photographs of the, tribal peoples, I suppose. I wish I could zoom in. Google Earth updated. Let me zoom in on the pictures so we can look closer. But I think those are really neat photos from so long ago. There's Madagascar's flag. Very cool. Old history that's still around. Not a lot of histories around here. And here you can see the beautiful beach areas. Let's see. This might have some pictures. Lots of Chinese tagged things. So I wonder if a lot of Chinese tourists come here because the people the people that leave little pins on the coastline here, they all are written in English and Chinese. So I wonder if this area's a big Chinese tourist area. I don't know. Ampatatra Beach. Look at that. It looks very nice, doesn't it? I would spend a long time here. There's a surf school. Do It's my favorite type of seafood. But yeah, very big bustling city region there. And as we move out, we can see some of the reserves. First, I want to show you this reserve, because we can see the cute shifaka lemurs. They're so fluffy. Some big bamboo growing, beautiful trees, beautiful cliffs, beautiful flowers. There's a little farm there. Everyone's gathered around. And there's a chameleon. Madagascar has lots and lots and lots of chameleons that live there. Some shifakas up in the trees. And a beautiful landscape. And these cool rocks, I think they're called singi in Malagasy. Very sharp little peaks. Look at the shifakas. They're so fluffy. A big chompy crocodile. And look, living the dream, being surrounded by little ring-tailed lemur friends. Kind of scary to see them standing like that. It looks a little intimidating, but they're still really cute. Pretty flowers. And look at this lemur. I don't know what he's called, but he's really sweet. Look at his little face. And a little shifaka walking around like a person. This reserve is also really cool. Oh, never mind. Maybe it's a different one. This has some neat pictures. The cascade, that means waterfall. I can see some beautiful natural waterfalls up here in the lush tropical rainforest mountains. There's some trees being planted, maybe some palm trees, maybe for palm oil. And some neat statues. I wonder how old those are. There's another picture. Neat statues. Lots of lush vegetation, another one of those cool statues. Look at these, they're so cool. They're very long and narrow, aren't they? But yes, I assume it's very humid, very lush as you're in the water, enjoying the cold, cold waterfall. Very tropical here. I can see why this is a tourist spot. Because you have the beach and then you have the jungles to hike in and explore. I didn't find much else to show you on Google Earth TBH, but lots of, look how thick the jungle is here, because you can see, oh, I think this is what I wanted to show you, National Park Ando. You can tell, like, the areas that are preserved. Look at all these cacti down here, because it's it's so, like, thick jungle compared to the rest of the area. Some bamboo, some succulents, some breadfruit, lemur, bamboo, beautiful. Oh my gosh, you can almost like feel the humidity, can't you? There's another shifaka, the fluffy lemurs. It looks so peaceful, doesn't it? There's another chameleon. Check him out. Changing colors. Like when you think of chameleons, like the color changing ones, those live in Madagascar. More breadfruit. And a good example of what we're going to look at in the north, you can see it's much drier. And really interesting trees and foliage as well. So you can definitely tell the protected regions from the non-protected regions from above, can't you? But then we move into this rocky area up here, and it gets drier and drier as we go. And there's no slideshows or anything up here because it is very sparsely populated. And the people here, from what I've seen, are, struggling, but they're getting by in the ways and customs that they've been following for hundreds of years. So progress is slow but steady. It's happening. I just wish it was sooner than later. Lots of other little coastal areas here. there's a neat spot where you can see some mining over here. Lots of uranium, lots of precious gems are mined in this region. And actually, there's a plant that grows here. I was talking about this in the Androy region. I forget what it's called, but they use it to treat childhood leukemia. So I think Eli Lilly has a monopoly on that in southern Madagascar. But you can see this mining area here, and look how interesting. What do you think this means? I wonder if it was a 150th anniversary of something that they built that. I don't know, but it stands out now. It's all I can see when I zoom out. And yeah, let's finish out by looking at this botanical garden. I'll close out the video looking at some beautiful little lemur friends and some gorgeous plants. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this style of content, please consider subscribing. This is an ongoing series on my channel where we go to every single little corner of the world, and we're going to explore some ones tomorrow a bit further north of here in Seychelles. So be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a good